Welcome back to 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I do 50 minutes of exercise and read 50 pages of a physio book in a day in an attempt to rehab myself. This is day 13. Jumping straight into the exercise portion of things today, so I did a large variety of these sort of weird neck exercises. The majority of these I gained over some time from watching MSK neurology videos, a guy that I've talked about previously that I really like. And some just sort of my own experimentation, just sort of testing things out today. So looking first at this initial exercise, tiny little movements. I'm trying to get my suboccipital muscles to fire. So these are the muscles at the base of your skull, really tiny. That's why I'm doing these tiny little head nods, just as a way to get some activation through them. Looking at the next exercise where I'm bringing either my lateral eyebrow or my forehead to my shoulder, or trying to at least. This is just a target, I believe it's the posterior and middle scalene. I think one of them was left out, maybe the anterior, not sure, but generally the scalenes. I really like this one. You can definitely overdo it. I've overdone it previously. I've never really known that with other exercises before, but with this one it's like, okay, it feels good, oh god, you've done too much. But ultimately, like a really good exercise. And then coming to this sort of like extension, so sort of allowing my head to sort of come into flexion, then extend up to neutral, and then it continue to extend, but also extend through my thoracic spine simultaneously once I'm at like 90 degrees. And this gets like a really lovely sensation through the spine, feeling like everything's sort of working in unison, which I'm a big fan of. The thing that was experimental was trying to do flexion. I haven't seen MSK neurology talk about this before, but I guess I've sort of torn on doing this because flexion is sort of like a classic chronic, I'm not moving much sort of state, everything's sort of hunched over. But you know, if we're training extension, it feels good to train flexion. So, you know, it felt okay to do, it didn't feel incredible, but I think it was alright. What was really cool though was I did all of this prior to going surfing with a friend. I don't surf too much, and in part because it hurts. But I actually noticed after and during, I didn't have quite as much pain. Not none, but definitely a reduction. So it seemed like those exercises did actually help, which is really cool. And the last thing that I just want to touch on the exercise portion of things today was trying to do this dowel extension, so working towards like a dislocate basically. Not actually dislocating my shoulders, it's just the exercise. It felt okay. It was kind of good till horizontal. Then I was sort of like unsure if it should be externally or internally rotated, and it felt a little janky. So it's not great from that point, so still got to sort of see what to do from there. Jumping into what I've learned, so we've now started Ultimate Back Health and Fitness by Dr. Stuart McGill. It's something I've been very excited to read for a long time. And diving in, we started covering some of the info that I've been craving and chasing for a really long time. So for starters, he's saying about stretching. We always want to pre-qualify someone to see if they can stretch. I think really what he's getting at here is that he's quite, I don't want to say anti-spine movement, but certainly if you're in like the early stages of an injury, he would say like, don't pick the scab. Even with a chronic injury, right? So heal up first. So you want to make sure somebody's actually capable of stretching before we ever get them to go down that path. Don't just assume stretching's for everyone. I think that's a really good approach. On that, he said if we do get somebody to stretch, we don't want to just push someone to end range and then sort of let them go about their life. We really want to try and develop a motor pattern for that. And that really like echoes a great Cook from my perspective, like saying mobilize then strengthen. Right, yes, we've given you range, but you don't really have control over that range yet, so really we need you to develop some sort of exercise to have that control once we've sort of given you a little bit less tension in the system. Again, on the more nuanced perspective McGill has on, I think, spine movement generally, he's saying stabilize what you need to stabilize and mobilize what you need to mobilize. If something is tight because it is weak, stabilize it. If something is just tight for, I guess, any other reason, like yeah, try and mobilize it, but don't just throw crap at the wall basically, and I do really appreciate that perspective. Whilst he has been more clear here, I will say that generally the sentiment I get is that he's not a big fan of stretching, and he's saying that he's really only a proponent of stretching for asymmetry. So not like, hey, you just want to increase your range of motion that is not great bilaterally, he wouldn't really be touching, is sort of what I'm getting from what he's saying. But if you have 20 degree range of motion and extension on your right and 40 on the left, it's like, okay, stretch the right. And I'm glad you're a proponent of that, because it does seem like common sense. One thing that I think would be really helpful in this conversation about trying to stretch and then train a motor pattern is he said that when pain is present, it inhibits motor pattern development, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Like, why would I want to ingrain something that causes pain? But with that in mind, I think that's like a good indicator of like when maybe stretching would be necessary. It's like, well, it's painful to try and do this pattern, this exercise. So do I need to release something to make that actually viable? Okay, and I think ultimately there might be more information on this, but McGill just put it in writing that he is not anti-spine movement. He's very clear here. It's that spine flexibility is an end goal after you have stability and endurance. And very explicitly again, he said some people won't ever get to that point. Now I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's just because you didn't do the stability stuff or you weren't able to. I'm not quite sure. But that's such a relief to hear that I've been going down this path of thinking like, I think I can train spine movement, but I'm really scared, and in part I'm scared because of what I've read from McGill. So that's really cool. I think we're really like heading towards that balance of stabilize endurance, then mobilize, train flexibility. And considering that we need to stabilize and then train endurance before we get to flexibility, it's very interesting, he said, that to have proper back endurance and to increase that endurance, we need to have a neutral neck. One of the things I've often noticed is like my neck sort of kinks out in weird ways when I'm doing some exercises as like some sort of compensation. It's nice to see here, it's like, hey, like you actually really need to keep that still, because that is what will keep the rest of the spine healthy. That's what will keep you at like a high endurance state. One of the things I've really struggled with is like hamstring bridges and like glute activation generally, because McGill sort of argues you don't want to be hamstring dominant. And there's a few points that sort of outlined here. So one is that you can try and brush the quads to try and get some activation that sort of increases neural activation, which is really cool, the like brushing effect. The other thing he said is if you're hamstring dominant, avoid cycling. Apparently it's sort of like reinforces that pattern. One of the really helpful and I think hopeful messages that I read in these last 50 pages, or also the other 20 I didn't discuss yesterday, was around fiber plasticity. And it's really hopeful because he's saying like you can't fully change it, but you can move things in the right direction. So if you want to be more explosive, or if you want to be more like endurance heavy, you can actually get some like plasticity in that fiber, and I think that's really cool. And on a similar note, he's saying the vestibular system, so like your balance, so unless you have like some sort of vestibular disease, is super trainable. So again, really cool, like these things can all improve, which I love hearing that message. And on this idea of training the vestibular system and just any system generally, he's saying that if you impair other systems, it's often easier to train those systems. So if you want to train proprioception, like hypothetically, you could essentially like blindfold yourself so you don't have vision, and that way your proprioceptive training will improve, which is like the classic, like, you know, you lived underground forever, now like you couldn't see, but like you could hear better. So it's cool that actually has like some validity to it. And yeah, look, that is about it for day 13. If things do look a little different, it's because this video fully deleted itself, and I only noticed many weeks later in post before uploading this. So here I am, Bailey from the future. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.